I'm excited today to have Niels Siskens on the podcast. As the CEO of ParroLabs, Niels empowers businesses of all sizes with nearshore tech and creative solutions, delivering Latin America's top tech talent to their doorstep. With over 6.5 years of experience in the nearshore industry, he has built a strong network of seasoned engineers, designers, and virtual assistants who are proficient in the latest technologies and frameworks. He also hosts the Tilt Show, a dynamic podcast that bridges North American and Latin American tech experts, offering invaluable insights for anyone aiming to initiate or expand their tech business in the region. Through this platform, he promotes and contributes to the evolution of the Latin American tech landscape, showcasing the opportunities, challenges, and innovations that shape it. His mission? To connect, inspire, and enable tech success across the Americas. Niels, I'm so glad you're here today. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, William.
Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author, and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
Niels, I would love for you to share a little bit about your story with our listeners, particularly around your journey and your development as a leader. How did you get started?
That's very interesting. I'm originally from Holland, but I've lived places. I've lived in Canada, the US, Costa Rica, and Spain. And about 10 years ago, I came to Colombia and I loved it. So I've been here ever since.
Nice.
And about, a year and a half in, I opened my first agency as a nearshore. We, supply talent specifically to North America, like that's US and Canada. So I've been doing that for the last nearly 10 years now. So yeah, it's approaching 10 years. In terms of leadership, it's very different here. It's more hierarchical than you would find it in specifically Europe and the US. Like the US is very flat in terms of like the technology companies are very flat organizations. Everybody would call you by their first name. But here it was still a little bit more traditional. It's changed since then. So especially with the North American influence. But yeah, when I came here, people really saw you as a god almost. But yeah, I wanted to change that culture from the get-go because I like it North American culture way better.
You and I have talked previously about a number of things dealing with the agency world. And a lot of the people listening to this, they're entrepreneurs, they're digital marketing agency owners, they're business leaders of a lot of different stripes. And one thing that a lot of people are thinking about when they start a business or as they begin to grow and scale it is, what does the exit look like? What does it look like at some point to hand this thing off, to sell it? And that is not something that I believe anybody is born knowing how to do. You have to figure it out. You have to get wise counsel. I watched my grandfather start a business back in the 1960s, and he grew it and sold it in the 1980s, right? And the exit allowed he and my grandmother to live for the rest of their lives based on that recurring income from that sale. That's kind of the entrepreneurial dream. And I know a lot of the people listening have that in mind too. They want at some point to be able to exit, whether it's through an acquisition, a sale, however it is. You do a lot with this. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about what does it look like if that's your goal? What are some of the things you need to be thinking about that you need to keep in mind?
So, William, I would correct you there because I think actually not a lot of people think about it. I think a lot of people dream about it to sell their company, but
what a good difference.
That's a major difference. I think most people
like
just, when they start an agency, the issue that they have is, they get boxed in some kind of job. I've been there as well. And it's usually not a fun job. And more often than not, it's not a very high paid job. It might turn into a high paid job at some point. Yeah. But to sell your company, nobody's going to pay for a company where they can make $100,000, right? They're not going to pay a lot of money for it because you can apply at any job, make the same amount of money, and you don't actually have to pay any money for it, right?
Yeah.
So companies usually, when they sell for anything at all, I mean, they usually have an owner that's not very hands-on, that's sort of, having a yacht somewhere, or lives in Thailand or whatever, enjoys life, and his team operates it, right? So it's not that if you have an agency, it automatically turns into something that's worth something to somebody, right? So where people dream about like, okay, hey, I'm building this thing and I hope one day to get, $1 million, $2, $3, $5 million for it. But that doesn't work like that. You have to really have all the processes worked out, and it needs to pretty much operate for, multiple years without you being there physically, right? So
That's
that
so
is
wise. I like that distinction between a dream and a plan.
exactly, yeah. So I always, I always tell people this. It's like, look, let's say you're 20, you mentioned 20 years down the line for your grandfather, right? And that's kind of normal because it takes time to work out the market, to get product market fit. And then, yeah, I mean, if you're 20 years, I'm 42 right now, so 20 years be like early retirement. Um, let's say you have a yacht, which also a lot of people dream about, right? It could be a sailing yacht, any yacht. And let's say you have, two owners that talk to each other, right? And the first one says, look, I sold my business. Or look, sorry, I have my business. It operates itself, right? And that's why I could buy the yacht and I'm here and I can, pretty much do whatever. And I have Starlink, and once a week I check in with the team. And the second owner has the same yacht, but he has to be, with his team 5 days a week, and they can only use the yacht 2 days a week, right? So which owner do you want to be, right? And in the end of the day, both have the same yacht. Let's assume it's the same thing, right? Yeah, and then if you're in the yacht club bar, which business are you going to buy, right? Not the one where you have to be there 5 days a week because you already have the money, so you don't really want to, start doing the work on the one that doesn't require a lot of work, right? So as you mentioned, like where I come in, where I help a lot of owners, is think about, okay, look, you have this team of developers, right? You build it from scratch. Let's say you have 5 developers. Where we help them out is like we coach them, and then we take some of those developers' skills, we take them near shore where it's a lot cheaper. So in the end of the day, their bottom line goes up. And also in 5-10 years, their multiple goes up by a lot. So let's say, in case of 10 people, usually a developer in the US makes anywhere from 100,000, 150, sometimes cheaper, but that's about what in a good city, New York, Atlanta, those are salaries that are being paid. Nearshore, although it's gone up, is still a lot cheaper. And so let's say you make, 30%, 50% on that. That's a serious amount of money, and that multiplies if you sell it, right? The multiple usually is anywhere between 4.5 if you're on the low end to like 10 if you get super lucky, right? So yeah, so that's sort of what I coach people on is like, look, you have this operation. Some of your tech staff is really good. Some is a little not, right? Let's look at them and see how we can sort of come in there, right? Yeah, so that's a little bit where a lot of, I would say, marketing agency and also tech agencies, they go off a little bit, right? So if you have the operation for tech like really structured out, it brings you to usually needing to work a lot less. That is what we worked out. And including ParroLabs, because we're not, a 2,000 head agency either, which is like a really big one. We also have our specialty, right? So you need, like, a marketing agency needs to look at what are we really good at, right? So that's the other thing. A lot of people want to do everything. So if you sell everything to everybody, cut out some things because there's usually things that are you're probably better, like somebody else is better at it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
When somebody is at the center of the spider web and everything connects to them as the owner, every decision has to come to their desk. Everybody's constantly asking, "Hey, what about? What about? What about? What about?" When they talk to you, they come to you and they're like, "Hey, I'm thinking about an exit. I'd like to start talking about that." And they're at the center of the spider web still. No matter how old the agency is, everything's got to be run by them. Where do you start with them? Like, as you're talking with them, where do you begin?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been there, done that, right? I mean, I would say I don't have a specific name for people like that, but there is quite a few, not only agency owners, but I would say business owners that are like that. They're the micro managers that started their business, right?
Yep.
And I would always, I'm always thinking like as the big, entrepreneurs say, is like, look, you got to hand it over to other people and allow them to make mistakes. And that's the hardest thing, because those mistakes usually cost you a lot of money, right? I mean, could be that, I don't know, like, I mean, a specific example that I can come up with is that, the first assistant I hired here in Colombia, she didn't know what formatting a hard drive meant. So and if you go from a Windows computer to a Mac, the Mac will ask you to format the hard drive to use it. So long story short, we lost a lot of data that day, basically because of a formatted hard drive. Luckily, we
Yikes.
had a backup, but that was the first employee had on the first day. So that, and then since then, that's an example that I still have, sort of,
Yeah.
right? And I admire the person because she grew a lot with us being here. But I mean, since then, I've gone through like many things where you sometimes get a little bit allergies from like other people make a mistake, but that's the only way to build a team, build a company. And if
Yes.
everything has to go to you, you will always stay a small organization. So I would say, take some whiskeys at night, think about what went wrong that day, and allow people to overthink it, basically, or to redo it. Yeah.
Yeah, if people are at the center of the spider web, everything connects to them. What I'll often tell them is that when they start thinking about selling their business, you can't. You have to sell yourself because the
Yeah,
business
that's
is
true.
you.
Yeah. So, and if anyone who's going to buy your agency, they're going to talk to your employees. And if they all the time hear, no, William needs to approve this, or will ask William, then they soon know, oh, it's that kind of agency where we have to have William on board, because otherwise our entire organization crash, right? So, and a better answer for somebody buying is that, no, I have the guidelines right here. It's our SOP.
Yes.
We have a process in Jira, ClickUp, whatever you're using. It's not perfect, but it gives me enough guidance to do it, right? So
Yes.
the last couple of years, also in ParroLabs, we've been starting to work on that, like a lot, basically. And that is very important. And if you should basically make sure you're out of the operation as much as possible. You're the face of the agency. You need to go to clients, reel them in, sell them, basically. And that's basically the last thing you need to do, like set up the sales process and also outsource that to somebody. And then you're there pretty much, right? But yeah, if the agency is William, it's not worth a lot to anyone else.
That's right. Exactly. This is difficult, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs and agency owners to grab onto, because they started it this way. They've been doing it this way the whole time. What do you mean I have to change? What do you mean I can't lead it the same way I've been leading it? I got it this far. And what I often tell them is you can't lead a 7-figure agency the same way you led a 6-figure one. And you can't lead an 8-figure agency the way you led a 7-figure one. Can't do it. And if you're getting ready to sell, you've got to understand this thing has to be running without you, just like you're saying. And Niels, I think this is such a good thing for people to hear, because they think they know better. They think that, oh, well, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. But right now, I've got to be the one doing it. Nobody can do it like me. Nobody can do it as well as I can. You ever hear
Mhm.
this?
I I totally get where I have a friend. He's a very good friend. He probably listens to this when I send it to him, but he owns a hotel with a restaurant based, and he still spends about, 3, 4 hours a day to do shopping for his hotel because he believes nobody buys vegetables as well as he do. He doesn't trust the delivery service because they don't select the right, tomatoes. And that is, he's been trained that a chef buys his own ingredients, and to an extent, it will lead to a better project or product. But in the end of the day, you got to let that go because you're spending 3 hours a day to buy tomatoes and olives and whatever goes in your recipes. But you got to hand that over at some point, right? And
Yes.
of course, you will get bad tomatoes one day, but then the next day they'll be better, and you just tell the guy who brought the bad tomatoes not to never come again, basically, right? That is like how you get the better tomato.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's hard for anyone, not just agency owners, to hand over to let go of like control,
Yeah.
right? And the ones who let too much control, that's the other side, basically, have no control, and that is also not good. So it's a mixture of both.
It's true. I had a mentor tell me years ago that if somebody else can do something 80% as well as you can, you have to delegate it to them. And
That's
man, I
probably
pushed back
true.
on that when I first heard it. I was like, 80%? That's not very good. Like, they should be able to do it 98, 99% as well before I hand it off.
Hmm.
But boy,
Yeah,
what a
and
trap that is.
yeah, and that's the trap. And then when you're at 95%, they will leave.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
That's usually
That's
what
exactly
happens as
right.
well. So you almost train them, and they decide,
That's right.
yeah. I mean, I've had that happen to me as well, and they
Yeah.
decide, so yeah.
As you pour more into your team, though, as you invest in them and give them more, not just responsibility, but you also give them authority. And you
Hmm.
delegate both of those things to your team. What I find is that when they feel invested in, they lean in. And they're far less likely to run down the street to another company. They're far less likely to go do something else because when somebody feels invested in, they feel known and they feel
Uh-huh.
seen and they feel
True.
heard. And that is so important when you're leading other people. But it has to start with you saying, hey, you know what? I trust you enough to hand this to you and not stand over your shoulder the whole time while you do it.
Hmm.
And boy, this is something I coach so many of my clients on because they struggle so much with it.
True. True. I mean, everybody has that, right?
Yeah, that's
I
right.
was in a leadership coaching years ago when I was still in Holland at Heineken.
Yeah.
And we were given a set of cards, and I still have those cards, not here at my desk, but they're in my office. And one of which was people empowerment. And so
Yes.
also big companies, they struggle with it. It's basically people
Yes.
empowerment. But when they do well, they do so much better, basically,
Yes.
right? And I worked in procurement consulting for a long time, and that's all about like, which products do you sort of like centralize in purchasing, and how do you distribute those products? So let's
Mm,
imagine like
yeah.
everybody works from home
Yeah.
at least a little bit still, right? And in
Sure.
COVID, everybody worked from home. Let's say
Yeah.
a large organization like Heineken did not have like an expense policy. So they would need to send out like anything small. Like let's say somebody's mouse broke. So then somebody would need to go, to the office to get a mouse, right?
Yeah.
To, the office, get the mouse. That's frustrating for everybody. If you just have a policy, okay, hey, if your mouse breaks, this is what it needs to, like, these are the models that we suggest, sort of. If you want
Yeah.
another mouse that's more expensive, you have to pay the difference, whatever, something like that. Because,
Yeah.
and that saves, in the end, that saves a lot of money. But for agency owners, that also gives people more power. Some people want to have I don't even know what a mouse costs, but, um, some people have very specific wishes about mouses. Some people have economic issues or are afraid for economic issues, and they don't care spending $20 more on a different mouse.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, for agency owners to have control about everything there, we we send out mouses to everybody. That's maybe not the best example, but if they break, I mean, I don't care if they go to a shop and get a new one.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's like it's a little bit like, okay, hey, do you really care about those things for somebody who, you know, has a lot of experience? It can be tantalizing, like to be that person that you described, William.
100%. So let's say somebody's listening. They own an agency. They started it, and they're in a good spot. They have removed themselves from day to day fulfillment. Right?
Hmm.
They may still be a part of acquisition and sales, maybe a bit, but really they've removed themselves from most of the day to day. And they just have to occasionally check in with the team, provide some leadership, some high level stuff. But
Hmm.
they're really doing what only they can do, and they're letting and hiring other people to do everything else. Say they're in that good spot
Hmm.
and they want to start thinking about either exit or acquisition. What's their next step?
Okay, so the decision that everybody has to make. I mean, I have friends who sold their agency for a good chunk of money, so they're happily living the life. But they also tell me that on a day-to-day basis, they still think about their team. They still think about their operation. It was, their life. It's sort
Yeah.
of the same feeling as a soccer player who retires at 39,
Yeah.
thinks about like still being on the field. So really think
Yeah.
about, okay, if you were to sell it, what's next? Are
Yeah.
you coaching others? Are you going to be an investor? Are you going to be, and more often than not, you will have what's called an earn out. So it's not like somebody thinks, okay, hey, this agency is worth, let's say $10 million because they really do well.
Yeah.
No, it's usually more often than not, it's like, okay, you will have an earn out, which means your performance or actually the performance of the exit will depend on the performance of the company in the next couple of years, right? So it basically means effectively that you will get a portion of that, let's say 30%, which is still good money, but then effectively for a few years you'll be working for somebody else, right? For the most part. And not
Yeah.
everybody is suited for that. It will mean
Yeah.
like you might have to go with, let's say Heineken were to buy your agency, right? You would have to go with their expense policy. You would have to go stay in the hotel that Heineken has a contract with. You're not as free as you're today. So
Mm.
really think about like, okay, if I'm going to do an earnout and I really, how sick of my team am I, right? Do I
Yeah.
just need to go like, the Himalayas for 6 months, or do I need, like, because the money you will get for your agency, if it's like a 10x, of course, it's 10 years of earnings, which is fantastic, right? But I mean, if you hold on to it after 10 years, and let's assume it was flat and not decreasing, you would still hold on to your agency, right? Now,
Mhm.
that doesn't
Yeah.
go forever because life doesn't last forever,
Sure.
but what you sell is definite, right? So of
Yeah.
course, if you get a really good offer, I mean, it's usually a good thing, right? Now, the other thing you might want to think about is like if you're good at, let's say, Google Ads, right? You have built an agency that's fantastic in that. What are some of the additional skills you might want to invest in? So, Google Ads always need a good web developer, right? So, what is a good web development agency in your sector? You might want to either partner up with them, or do some acquisition in that field, or build an entire new team around that, right?
Yeah.
So myself, in my case, ParroLabs is fairly running itself. I have a great manager in place. I'm still there. I mean, but it's more because I want to, and I'm still in the process of like building it a little bit. But it doesn't cost me the full time. So we build a new team, which is called No Code Bandits, which is Webflow and yeah, primarily Webflow, but it's like no code integrations, no code websites where we think we can help a lot of people, right? And enthusiastically, I build it in a very small team, and it's just giving me a little bit of passion. So it's more like, okay, I guess if you're 42, it's different than if you're 62, right? At
Yeah.
62, you think, okay, hey, I don't really want to spend more time in management meetings. But really, the first step is think about, okay, if you sell, it's definite. and nobody is going to give you a check just in cash. It's very rare. Like it's not going to happen. And the other thing is, even though, you might want to hold on to it, like if your stocks are still, if you still generate income, right? Why sell if you don't have to do anything? It's everybody's dream, right?
Yeah.
People actually buy houses to gain passive income, right? They want to get the rent. So if right now the houses are extremely expensive also because of that reason. But if you hold on to your agency, you can still get, almost passive income, right? So it might not be a bad thing to hold on to it. Now, the other thing is, if you find, let's say, 5 other agencies that want to sell and they all have complementary skills, it might be a good idea that you find some sort of way where one operator operates the entire team, all the agencies, basically, and that you sell together, because bigger means a higher multiplier. So, and it's better. It's a different market. Agencies who are making 20 million a year sell for a different price than the ones that sell for 2 million. It's just a fact, right? So there's opportunities there as well.
So many good things to think about there. And this is where it really benefits to have a conversation with you, because you have a lot of experience dealing with this and helping people navigate. Is this something I really want to do? You're asking different questions, and you're really diving deep to help people and business owners to understand, hey, is this really where I want to go? What's this going to mean for me? What's it going to mean for my team? What's next? What's the next chapter look like? These are all fantastic questions that I'm afraid too many people don't ask. And you'll never get the right answers unless you ask the right questions. This is where your expertise shines. And Niels, I really want to encourage any of the agency owners or business owners who are listening to have a conversation with you, because I think you're able to ask the questions that maybe nobody else is going to ask them.
Yeah, that's certainly, I'm certainly open to, to talk to, your clients as your coach. Also, other people that are listening to this podcast. Where we shine is like, as I said, is like optimize their IT, their operations there.
Yeah.
Then their web and mobile development, and that is where we shine. But yeah, certainly it's always good to talk to people and think about, like, hey, how should they bring in their, how should they think about the future, right? And that's where we've been doing, helping a lot of agency owners. Today I spoke also with an agency owner in Canada, coincidental, and they're in the same sort of spot, like, hey, what's next for us? What are we going to focus on?
I want to talk about you for just a minute, Niels. Your team, your company is going to need you to lead at a higher level a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, than where you're leading today. What are you doing to intentionally stay on top of your game? What are you doing to level up with the new leadership skills that your team and your business are going to need you to have?
Yeah, so that's interesting. That's a very interesting question, because I know exactly where you're coming from. So when I started ParroLabs, like in the beginning, I was still setting up servers and configuring them, and I'm not the best. It's called a DevOps. I'm not the best, cloud engineer, DevOps, but I can do it, right? And and that's not something that a CEO of a larger agency would typically do. They would talk to lawyers, investors, things like that, right? So that's a different skill set, right? So now the days that I was configuring servers at night, and those were very stressful as well. So it's like everything has an advantage and disadvantage. But I think what you need to do is ask you on a not maybe daily basis, but on a quarterly basis, make a plan for the quarter. And see if you're still the person that can lead that team to the next level, right? That's the question I raised. I have, I studied MBA in Spain about almost 15 years ago. And none of the things what I was doing the first, let's say, 5 years of ParroLabs had anything to do with that MBA. So the skill set that I gained in that program are valuable right now, right? And you might not have to do an entire MBA. You might want to just do some leadership course. It could be online these days or some hybrid version. But that's what I would recommend is like, do you still have the skills? And if not, you might want to consider hiring the next CEO. And there's no shame in that, right? Right? Many organizations did that, right? Many people think that Elon Musk founded Tesla, but that's not the case. There were two guys before him, and one of which I met years ago that actually, and they that actually founded that company, and they thought they weren't suited, and somehow they got in touch with Elon, and Elon has been, managing that company to the next level. So no shame in that.
It reminds me of something that Marshall Goldsmith writes about when he says in his book that what got you here won't get you there. There's a point at which it's wise to bring in outsiders, people from the outside who have different skills, different gifts. So often founders can take a company so far, but it takes somebody else coming in to take it to a different level because sometimes they're starters. And that's a fantastic gift. But that doesn't mean a starter has all the gifts it takes in order to go to a different level.
Mm-hmm.
And I love your illustration of Tesla. I think that's fantastic. And there are so many others where a founder started it, spooled it up, got it running, and built an organization that could go to the next level, built the foundation. And then somebody else can come in with fresh eyes, fresh perspective, and a different gift set and skyrocket it.
Yeah, true. Because think about the guy you described in the beginning, the one that is the spider in the web for everything.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody else that comes in with fresh eyes likely will not want to be that person because it's
That's right.
Yeah. So let's say
Absolutely.
you bring in a CEO and you give him a salary and a bonus. He does not want to take all those decisions. Like,
That's
what
right.
color should the coffee cups be in the cafeteria? Like those kind of things, right? And for sure that is, I've been there. I mean, everybody's been that first person because
Absolutely.
that's how you sort of, keep control. But that's not how you go further in the future, right? So yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're constantly learning. You mentioned your MBA, a very structured program to help you gain skills and develop things that you're using today at the level that ParroLabs is at today. Is there a book in your journey that you have come across that has made a really big difference for you that you would recommend to other leaders who are listening? Hey, if you haven't read this, you should check it out.
I mean, there's many that come to mind, right? I mean, there's many books. If I had to pick one, I would say there's one book that was given to me last year that describes exactly what this podcast was about. It's Built to Sell. I forgot the author actually, but it's exactly what you described as well. Like there's this spider in the web guy that does everything, sells everything to everybody, has no control over processes, and then he gets coached exactly on like, hey, okay, if you trust me, let's build a different agency, right?
Yeah.
I would say like that book together with coaching has been phenomenal. Basically, like I would say the biggest advice I can give anyone is set a time on the horizon, right? Set a timeline. Let's say January 2027, right? Where you want to be with X number of employees, right? And you want to have all your processes sorted, right? And if you buy that yacht or not, and if you want to sell, but you should be at the point where you can sell, right?
Yeah.
So you're at the point where, okay, if I'm at that stage, I'm that person, I'm not taking any of these decisions. I have the team in place. If that person leaves, it's not damaging the agency other than for a few weeks we need to, onboard the next person, basically we need to hire. If you're at that level, it's really, really easy to, you're in a good spot, but you got to pick a date, basically. Because if you leave it going, it will never pick that date. You will never achieve it. It's like
That's good.
if you're doing any course, like a bachelor, you have 4 years to do it. It's not like forever, be able to take forever. No, there's 4 years, there's X number of courses. With a business, there's no course material, but you have certain steps. So
That's
I
good.
wouldn't say a coach is like necessary, but an accountability body, right? Like
Yeah.
if you go to the gym, if you go with somebody, you're more likely to go. You have
That's true.
somebody that's holding you accountable.
Yeah. So good. Niels, this has just been a fascinating discussion around this topic, and I know our listeners have gleaned so much from it. If they want to connect with you, and I know they will, and continue to learn from you, what is the best way for them to do that?
I am very, very active on LinkedIn. That's sort of my Rolodex. That's where I am on a daily basis. So just connect with me there. I would also say we're in touch already. So if people already know you and they want to hear more about like, hey, what does it mean? Where should I go? I mean, we can connect. Yeah, those are the methods I use most. So LinkedIn almost on a daily basis.
Excellent. Niels, thank you for sharing so freely and so openly today. This has been a fantastic masterclass when it comes to thinking about exits and acquisition. I appreciate your generosity today.
Thank you very much, William, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me for this episode today. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do two things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, if you don't have a copy of my newest book, Catalytic Leadership, I'd love to put a copy in your hands. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a copy for free. Just pay the shipping so I can get it to you, and we'll get one right out. My goal is to put this into the hands of as many leaders as possible. This book captures principles that I've learned in 20 plus years of coaching leaders in the entrepreneurial space, in business, government, nonprofits, education, and the local church. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take a next step with a coach to help you intentionally grow and thrive as a leader, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to catalyticleadership.net to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, leaders, choose to be catalytic.
Thanks for listening to Catalytic Leadership with Dr. William Attaway. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Want more? Go to catalyticleadership.net.